What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shaped their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is retired Brigadier General Bernard Banks. Bernie knew as a child that he wanted to go to West Point because of his desire to develop himself as a leader. He was so successful in that journey that years later, West Point asked him to chair their leadership department. Bernie has led multiple military units ranging in size from 10 to 3,000 people. In the early 2000s, he was brought in to improve an Apache Helicopter unit that was ranked in the bottom third globally. In just 2 years under Bernie's leadership, that same group was designated number one. Today, he is an associate dean at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, teaching leadership in the MBA program. I am pleased to welcome a man with graduate degrees from all three of my safety schools, Northwestern, Columbia, and Harvard.
The games we are playing in many respects, are a metaphor for how we choose to live our lives. Do you want to be known as the person who got the best stats, but was not viewed favorably by your teammates? Do you want to be viewed as the person whose selfish actions cost the team a potential victory? Do you want to be the person who is so myopically focused on self that they don't realize the damage they're causing to others? All of those things can happen in sport if you're not cognizant of what you're doing, because you aren't really thinking about the why.
General Banks, thanks so much for joining us.
It is wonderful to be here today, Don. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I love your story. I love the idea that we get a chance as both friends and colleagues to talk a little bit about sports and its impact on your development. Sports obviously became an important part of your life early. Do you remember an early interaction with the ball and how much it meant to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my father comes from a large family. So there are 6 siblings in his family. And my grandparents on my father's side lived in Lynchburg, Virginia, what we call the city of 7 Hills. And from my earliest days I can remember, I would be outside with my uncles and aunts playing various games, whether it was sledding down the large hill in their backyard in the winter or playing a game of pickup football or some other sport during the warmer months. But from my earliest memories, I always just remember being engaged in athletic pursuits, initially with my family. And then once I was old enough to enter into organized sports activities, I did so immediately. My high school had one of the best track and field programs in the country at that time.
Right.
My freshman year, we were ranked in the top 3 high school track teams in the country. We had an amazing collection of talent, and we had a coach who was renowned in track and field in the state of New Jersey. We had a powerhouse program that prepared people to compete at the highest levels of the sport. And I had demonstrated some above average potential early on. And thus I was convinced by Coach Scullion that track and field was the best place for me at Monmouth Regional. Back then, unlike today, if you were a good athlete, you kind of cycled through every sport.
Right.
As opposed to today where you just kind of single track from an early age. And so you'd move from sport to sport. So I went from football to indoor track freshman year and then ran outdoor track, was in the top 5 in several events at the 9th grade level. So they said, hey, you should really do this as opposed to splitting your time back and forth. So I said, okay, great. Then I will make track and field my thing. And that's what I pursued basically throughout the rest of my high school career.
Yeah, you mentioned Coach Scullion, and yes, their program, I had a chance to learn a little bit about it. I mean, he was there 31 years, and as you mentioned, right, they were ranked as high as number 3 in the country at one stage as a high school track team. As you think of him as a leader, what aspects of his leadership style were you able to identify and maybe even one day emulate?
Yeah. So when I think about Coach Scullion, several things come to mind. One, he was technically competent. He had been a very accomplished athlete and he knew the science of athletic preparation very, very well. So, in terms of being able to craft activities to prepare somebody to compete well, he was outstanding. Two, he was a disciplinarian. He held us to high standards. He believed in the importance of accountability. Three, he took an active interest in who we were as individuals. He wanted to see us use sports as a vehicle for advancing our personal and professional aims going forward. And then the last thing was he always extolled the virtues of being a great teammate. Many times people think of track as an individual sport. You run your event, but how you elect to compete influences the team's outcomes. And many times you're competing on relays, which is a team endeavor. So he was very big on getting us to understand how to exercise our responsibilities on the team in order to put the team in a position of advantage. I think I've carried those lessons forward, the importance of preparing well, the importance of making sure you get to know people on the individual level, the importance of setting high standards, and the importance of thinking about how your actions contribute to the well-being of those around you.
I love those four. Those are really powerful. And that fourth one, though, you hit it on the head. Track is generally considered a very individual sport, right? We think about you running 400 meters, you running 100 meters. How do you inspire great teammate environment in an organization that looks to be quite individualistic?
I'll give you an example. Say you're running the 2-mile relay. So everybody's going to run an 800-meter leg. But where you get placed in the relay is a function of understanding your respective strengths, the competition, and what's going to unfold in each leg. So who you put on the lead leg versus who you put on the third leg are very different. Some people run best when they have to play catch up. Others are better when they're out in front. So understanding the different strengths of the people you position, just like a batting order in baseball.
Right.
And the same thing's true in business. You want to put your people in a position to win, not just to hope that they win, but to figure out what the team requires, what their skills engender, and place them so that they have the greatest probability of winning.
Right.
Coach Scullion was brilliant at figuring out people's respective strengths, figuring out how they operate psychologically, and then baking that into the decisions he made about where he would place them in a relay order.
One of the things I loved in looking at your high school yearbook, which we did, some of these pictures are pretty stellar, Bernie. You're a good looking high school kid. I don't know what happened to you. Um, but one of your high school teammates, last name Jinks,
Charlie Jenks.
Charlie
Yep.
Jinks, yes.
Charlie Jenks now lives out in California, went to Rutgers University, became a career military officer. He's a great guy.
Did he? Well, he was asked and actually used the words great teammate to describe you, which I love because that's the point you're trying to make here. So clearly, what Coach Scullion was trying to teach worked for you. You became that great teammate. How do you now inspire some of that as you went through your career trying to build an organization around you within the military?
First, I try to help people understand the importance of the role they're enacting and then put it into a larger context. Everybody needs to understand how their piece of the puzzle contributes to the larger picture and why their piece is important. So creating that awareness of, hey, you're not just doing this single thing. This thing contributes to this set of things, and that set of things matters for this set of reasons. So one, helping people to understand the importance of the role they play. Two, helping people to understand how the things they learn in their current role will play a significant part in determining what future opportunities they get. So how can I help them to succeed in their current role so that they have access to more important roles going down the road. And then making them aware of, I'm here to help engender your success. I want to make you successful. Coach Scullion always said that. He was like, I want to make you successful. It's not about me as the coach, just wanting to be able to say my team won the state championship or whatever else. I only succeed in my role by helping you to succeed in your role. I always think about that on the teams I'm a part of. For every one of my team members, I view my own actions through the prism of, am I doing everything I can to set that person up for success and support them along the way?
Well, I love it. You did talk about what an amazing team that was, right? And how much talent there was in that particular sport. I saw that as a freshman there in high school, one of your teammates was actually a future Olympian, Milt Good, right?
Yeah.
When you're there in the presence of exceptionalism like that, even on a high school level, was there something you were able to learn from that?
The importance of preparation, to see the energy he put into perfecting his craft. I mean, obviously, he was very naturally gifted, but the level of precision he put into preparing himself so that he could operate as his absolute best was noteworthy. Because somebody who is naturally gifted could just leverage those gifts, and maybe those gifts are so much that even on a 60% of their best day, they're better than everyone else. But that was not him. It wasn't just about natural talent. I saw him put in the work over and over and over again, whether it was in preparation for technical aspects, whether it was in the weight room, but he put in the work in order to reap the rewards. So I've always taken to heart the importance of preparation. A lot of the leadership principles that I'm personally committed to embodying every single day still stem back from my upbringing as an athlete. When we think about the importance of focus, the establishment of clear priorities, when we think about preparation, do you put in the work? When you think about rehearsals, practice matters. For those who would say it's just practice, you will play how you practice. So, do you practice well? And then disciplined execution. When it's time to actually compete, do you compete the standard? Because you've put yourself in a position where you're prepared, you're excited, you're ready to take on that challenge. So when I think back about Milt Good, I think preparation. I saw him put in the work, no matter what the weather conditions consisted of.
Wow. You mentioned obviously the importance of preparation. One of the things about the military as a profession is that you all do, in fact, often practice, right? You are actually making sure that you're out there thinking through what it is, the objective that you're ultimately going to need to accomplish. You're not just going out and doing it for the first time generally when the objective is required. Did those practice regimens play into the way you led your team in the military?
Oh, without question. Absolutely. Because there were some who eschewed the importance of the practice. And I'll give you an example of that. I took over as the general manager of an aviation organization back in 2004. This was one of 14 business units in the Army that operated the Apache Helicopter. Each one of those business units had approximately 500 people. The GM of the organization would have roughly 700 million in assets under management. In my organization, we had both US and South Korean employees, and we operated over a large geographic region. When I took over that business unit, relative to the key performance indicators the Army uses to track how well a business unit is doing inside the Apache helicopter community, it ranked in the bottom third globally.
Mm.
Now, an organization of that type typically would go out to do a major training exercise once a quarter. That exercise might range anywhere from 1 week to a month in duration. It's where you leave your, what we call your home base, you go to some other location, and you run your organization through a series of scenarios designed to train on specific tasks and also to build capacity. Typical unit does that 4 times a year. Well, because I'm a big believer in preparation, I'm like, 4 times a year is insufficient. I believe we need to do this monthly. Now, you had a lot of grousing from people. Why do we have to go do this every single month? Nobody else is doing that. It harkens back to the way you get good at your job is by learning how to do your job well. It's not talking about it, it's doing it. So I started taking them on these exercises every single month. Initially, there was so much pushback, but I go back to preparation matters. Fortune favors the prepared. And over time, the grousing started to go down because they start to see significant improvements in their overall technical competence. Fast forward 2 years, that organization went from being in the bottom third globally to being designated number one globally amongst all the Apache helicopter organizations.
Wow.
And I attribute that in part to our willingness to prepare well.
I love it. Fortune favors the prepared. And if you're willing to go invest that time, that energy, and actually put yourself in a place to be able to go do all that, you find yourself more capable of greater things. What a great example. Coming out of high school, you do choose to go to West Point.
Mhm.
What an amazing opportunity and choice. Tell me about choosing West Point.
So, from the time I was a young child, I had a fascination with West Point. Going back to Lynchburg, Virginia, my grandparents' home, I learned to read in part by reading encyclopedias. I would pore through them, looking at the pictures and learning words and just reading. I read a lot. And I had a number of friends, fathers, who had attended West Point. And from a very young age, I just recognized there was something a little different about them. The way they carried themselves, the things that they chose to treasure, the excellence that they were embodied, and the relationships that they possessed. I decided I want that. I want to be that kind of person. And so from a very young age, I was like, I'm going to go to West Point and I'm going to be a pilot because my father was a pilot. I thought he had the coolest job in the world. So those were my two ambitions. And they really never wavered. From the time I was a very young child through high school, I was like, that's my number one destination. Now, for a while, I kind of got sideways on it because I was going to Catholic school in Hawaii. But then as we got closer to senior year, I said, I still have this West Point thing deep inside me. That's what I want to pursue. And so I was very fortunate to be given access to that opportunity. I was thrilled that my childhood dream was coming to fruition. And I'm glad I made the choice because it played out in ways that I never could have imagined, but it most certainly was consistent with what I thought I would experience being part of the institution.
You know, you get to West Point and you're looking at your athletic options. I love that you settled in on a sport I didn't know much about until I met you, sprint football, where every player has to be under 178 pounds and 5% body weight. There's all these requirements that allow sprint football to be special. How did you find your way into sprint football?
So when I got to the academy, I started out with what we call the big boys. That's the Division I football team, and rapidly saw that, hey, I am probably not going to get any playing time if I stay here. But we've got this other intercollegiate football team that I probably could get some playing time, but I was turning myself into a football player. I was unlike most folks. On the sprint team, you had highly accomplished athletes. Everybody on the varsity had made the all-star team at some level back at their high school. These were very good football players, but for many of them, they were just undersized at their position at the Division I A level. We had individuals on the sprint team that had played Division I AA football at other schools before transferring to West Point. So these were very good football players, and it was very fast paced. So I was like, hey, this just looks cool. I can either stay here with the big boys, and that's great, but there are people who are just playing better than me at my position, or I can go over here and you're still going to have to compete. These are very good athletes, but I have a higher probability of actually seeing significant game time. So I decided, hey, I'll go do that. And it was awesome. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
What was the most fun you had playing sprint football?
I mean, the best moments were not in the games, but in the process, whether it was the 2-a-day workouts or practice or just all the time spent together on buses traveling to play various opponents. I think back warmly on those things. Obviously, you've got signature moments that might transpire in a game, like the longest run I ever had in college, 76 yards against University of Pennsylvania for a touchdown. My friend Sam Houston clobbered the defensive end, opened up a huge gap. I go rushing through it, 76 yards to the house. And I was like, is today the day I'm finally going to crack the 100-yard rushing barrier? get one more carry, 12 yards. Now I'm up to 84. And then I didn't get another carry for the game. so, so, so then I was like, are you kidding me? I was on the verge of having my first 100-yard rushing game. I'm lighting it up right now. And I didn't get the ball again. I think back to that day where I'm like, come on. But there were lots of wonderful moments. But the moments were generally moments that were reflective of the process more so than a specific play in a specific game. The things I take away are the relationships forged and the perseverance one had to display, whether it was overcoming a hamstring injury, whether it was trying to compete for a higher position on the depth chart, whether it was experiencing the sting of a loss or the joy of beating Navy. There's just so much that is encompassed in that whole thing.
Doesn't matter what sport it is, beating Navy's always good, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any day, anytime, anything. It's a wonderful thing that I wish everybody could experience the joy of emotionally.
West Point is such a special place. I've been blessed to actually be there with you a few times. But I will tell you, one of the things that has always stood out to me is a declaration made in 1919 by General Douglas MacArthur, who was at the time superintendent of the school and wanted to make sure that the importance of athletics and the importance of being an athlete was driven into each and every cadet. And in fact, he actually had that famous saying, every cadet an athlete. How did that belief in the power of athletics affect you when you showed up on campus?
Leading requires a number of things. Leading is an interpersonal endeavor. You have to learn how to influence the actions of others. You have to learn how to work in concert with others, how to deal with conflict. You have to learn how to make tough calls. You have to learn how to be cooperative. Athletics reinforces all those. Whether you're an intramural, a club level, or an intercollegiate athlete at the academy, you're using sports as a vehicle for developing your understanding of all those things. How do you set a high goal? How do you work towards it? How do you compete with honor? How do you learn how to pick yourself up when you didn't win? How do you overcome injury? How do you develop grit? Athletics is a vehicle for all of those things. So I most certainly share General MacArthur's belief that sports plays an indispensable role in fostering one's character and acumen as a leader. Now, it doesn't say that sport will automatically create those outcomes. Sport can be a vehicle for creating those outcomes if you leverage sport the right way.
I love it. Just participating in sports alone doesn't make you a better leader, but you can leverage the experiences of sports to make you a better leader if you're open to it. What advice would you give to a younger version of yourself who might be an athlete today and wants to use those lessons later in life? How would you tell them to learn that leverage?
I think that's a wonderful question, Don. For me, I think that comes down to, do you understand the why behind what you're doing? If they think it's just about the game or they think it's just about their stats, they're missing the big picture. It's that the games we are playing in many respects, are a metaphor for how we choose to live our lives and what we want our lives to embody.
Hmm.
Do you want to be known as the person who got the best stats but was not viewed favorably by your teammates? Do you want to be viewed as the person whose selfish actions cost the team a potential victory? Do you want to be the person who is so myopically focused on self that they don't realize the damage they're causing to others? All of those things can happen in sport if you're not cognizant of what you're doing, because you aren't really thinking about the why. For anyone who's been involved in sports, they have to extrapolate from sport lessons that can be applied elsewhere. So you have to understand the why and then think about how you're going about your activities and what are the implications of that.
After graduation, you're in the Army for 28 years. Amazing career. As you were working your way through your leadership journey, how did you bring that why explanation into the communities you were growing?
If I think back to any Army team that I'm on, I would tell them We're here to win championships. Why does those championships matter? Because when we win championships, because we're really good at what we do, the American people get to live championship level lives
Hmm.
because we've underwritten the continuation of the democratic experiment. We have to put what we're doing into context. Why is it important for us to be good at what we do? Because when we're good at what we do, we provide a solid foundation to what others are able to do with their lives.
The world is a better place.
We have to be in service of the nation. Are we going to be okay with being ordinary at what we do as part of that? Or do we want to be extraordinary? It's just like best versus the rest. There's only one letter that's different, but there's a huge gulf that exists between that B and an R. What are you committed to being?
Hmm.
Are you committed enough to do what it takes to change the R into a B? And I submit that no one comes to work to fail, and that a leader's job is to unlock potential and helping people to understand, if you want to be part of the team I'm on, I will never, ever be okay with having an R. I want us to have a B, to be the best, not just to be like the rest.
Hmm.
It's okay if you want to be like the rest, but odds are we're not going to get along. So I'll help you to find some place where, once again, I want to put you in a position to win, because if you're not committed to trying to be the best, you're not going to be able to win in this organization, because I come to win because America demands that I come to win.
I love it. We did a session a few interviews ago with John Maxwell, the great leadership expert, and he had a great line. He talked about everyone wants to do what I do, but nobody wants to do what I did. They don't want to pay the price for exceptionalism. So I love it. You pressed that button on everybody that you had a chance to lead. We talked about Coach Scullion, great leader, taught you a lot while you were on his team there in high school. Were there others in your professional journey, your professional career, who became that kind of exemplar for you that you would lean back on and look back and say, these are people that I would tell you became the people I wanted to be like?
Absolutely. Numerous people. Archie Davis, the command sergeant major for that organization I mentioned previously in South Korea. He was the most senior enlisted soldier in the organization and extraordinarily technically and tactically competent, yet he was also extraordinarily focused on fostering the well being of every member of that organization.
Hmm.
He had very high standards, but he had very high interpersonal relationship acumen. I have a concept that I call hug and push. And I think I really have adopted this concept from watching the actions of people I admire, which is they're going to always strive to push you, but they're going to wrap their arms around you the entire time. They're going to love on you while making you uncomfortable. They're never going to let your feet grow moss underneath them. Archie Davis is a classic example of a hug and push leader. He's always going to push to get you to a better place, but he's always going to have his arms wrapped around you along the way. And I saw that reflected in a number of other leaders as well, because it's very easy to push
Hmm.
and to ignore the hug part. I think the best leaders do both. They hug and push.
I love it. I think you're exactly right. I think you identified it right early when you were talking about Coach Scullion teaching you. It's not just about being technically competent, but it was about caring about you. And you knew it. You were aware that he cared about you, which made you want to give him just a little more than you might have otherwise. You mentioned your father and his amazing influence in you as a young man. As an Army veteran, there was probably a lot of leadership lessons being taught to you around a dining room table. Were you born a great leader, or was it something you had to learn and develop?
This is the classic born versus made, and I think it's a combination of both.
Right.
And the research bears that out as well. Research indicates 1/3 of what accounts for a leader's success can be attributed in some measure to the natural gifts they possess, whether it's intellect, being naturally extroverted, name your thing. But overwhelmingly, what accounts for somebody's success are the gifts they develop over time. I was naturally drawn to positions of authority from a young age. I was the kid who was like, yeah, I don't mind being in charge. Somebody has to volunteer, I'll do it. So I had a natural predisposition to step into positions of responsibility. But overwhelmingly, what I've learned about how to unlock potential in an organization and drive performance stems from lessons I've learned along the way. It was not something I was just gifted with coming out of the womb. You can absolutely develop somebody into an outstanding leader over time. It's not about, oh, well, that person's just, they just have it. That can be an advantage, but it doesn't automatically assume. I know lots of really smart people that have never distinguished themselves as a leader. Why? Because despite the fact that they're smart, they haven't learned how to harness not only their intellect, but also their ability to connect in a useful way.
You hit it all. And as we've gone through this conversation, one of the things that's excited me about our relationship, my opportunity to grow and learn with you, has been a discussion you and I have had regularly about you and I are going to do a little ebook together. We've been working on it for a bit on this topic about, are you a team or are you a collection of people who are gathering a paycheck together? The word team is often just bandied around far too loosely and freely, especially in the corporate world today. When you think about that, what kind of differentiator would you draw about, are you a team or are you really just a team in name only?
Yeah, I think two things immediately come to mind: shared accountability. Are you willing to hold one another accountable? And mutual interdependence. Do you understand that success can only be achieved by working well in concert with others? Those two things are indispensable when creating an actual team. If you're able to be successful solely by working in isolation, that's not teamwork. Could be important work, but for a team to work, success cannot be achieved unless we consent to work well together.
Mm.
Additionally, given the reliance you have on working well with somebody else, do you open yourself up to being held accountable by other parties? So, this notion of shared accountability along with mutual interdependence, the two hallmarks of what's necessary to get people to really think through the prism of what's it mean to be part of a team.
Bernie, I love it. And I love the way that you have inspired so many to think a little differently about leadership. One of the things I know is that as you left West Point, as you were retiring from the Army, you were looking for opportunities where you could go and have the greatest influence. And you chose Northwestern and their amazing business school there to come join as associate dean because you wanted to help them develop leadership as a pursuit within the graduate school there. Tell me more about that choice and how that's gone now that you've been there a couple of years, and how is the teaching of leadership outside of the military?
So, first, I'd say I am extraordinarily fortunate to be part of the Northwestern Kellogg team. It is an amazing collection of people who are committed to making a positive difference in the world around them. When thinking about the opportunity that Northwestern Kellogg possesses to help shape the actions of leaders, several things come to mind. One, there's a recognition that leadership requires two things: competence and character. It is possible to be very competent and to lack character. It's possible to have tremendous character and lack competence. You need both. Competence will allow you to rise, but character will allow you to thrive. Because as you rise, you will have done things in such a way that it passes the litmus test of ensuring that your actions have both short and long term viability. Whereas if I'm extraordinarily competent, I can learn how to do financial engineering and I can figure out ways to circumvent laws and rules and everything else. I'll be really competent. But when you look into the litmus test, have you acted in an ethical way? If in fact the answer is no, while you were competent, your lack of character has now created risk. I want people to understand the importance of both. I want to ensure that what we give them access to from a developmental perspective is designed to enhance both competence and character. I can teach anybody how to do something the right way. It's far more difficult for them to understand what are the right things to do. And you have to think about both.
Mhm.
You have to think about both. I had a friend who once said something that's always stuck with me. And he said, I look for three things when hiring somebody who's smart, somebody who's driven, and somebody who's principled. And he says, whatever you do, don't hire somebody who's high on the first two, because a smart person who's driven can quickly drive you out of business if they don't believe in the right things.
If they're not driving the right direction.
That's the importance of competence and character. We have people who are very smart at Kellogg, and we have people who are very driven, but we also need to ensure our people are very principled.
General Banks, you're not just a man of great wisdom, you're also a man of great character. It's been an honor to engage and learn from you. Thank you for being a true corporate competitor.
Well, thank you, Don. I appreciate the invitation, and I wish all the best to those listening today. And if I can ever be of service to anybody, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can reach me on LinkedIn. You can also find me on the Northwestern Kellogg website. I am sincere when I say that. I am always delighted to be of service to others because that's how we create value in our own lives.
I could sit and talk to Bernie for hours. But before we end this episode, I want to emphasize how Bernie was able to turn that Apache helicopter unit into a high-performing organization. They went through 3 times the amount of training as other groups, 3 times what was expected of them. Bernie said it best. Fortune favors the prepared, and carving out preparation time in your calendar before meetings is sure to make you a stronger corporate competitor. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir. How are
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.